Happy to meet you.
Yeah? Yeah, we'll wait.
Tardy. I know. Oh, boy, I almost fell off this chair.
Oh my gosh, that'd be bad. That'd be bad. So I took my shirts to dry cleaners today, and I showed her where all my stains. Good evening. I will call the special meeting of the Federal Way City Council to order. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. H. David Kaplan, would you please lead us in the pledge? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, H. David, it's good to see you in your old chair. Thank you for being here, sir. All right. Okay, so we've got a very special meeting tonight, and we've got some things we're going to go through, a very exciting proposal. Councilmember Asefa Dawson will be joining us. She's en route right now, fighting the Puget Sound traffic. So with that, we've got our study session for the Town Center Hotel request for a proposal, the RFP response, and I will introduce our esteemed Economic Development Director, Tim Johnson.
Must be doing something right to get that kind of response. Esteemed is a word that I haven't heard yet here in Federal Way, so thank you very much. Heard a lot of other words. Council members, you have a variety of information before you tonight. Let's start with the city staff report. In December of last year, we began a process of setting out the information for the inquiring about interest for the town center proposal for a hotel. And in that process, we embarked on a direct letter campaign from the mayor to companies across the Pacific Northwest and the nation that build hotels predicated upon the criteria that was set out for us, which would meet the market demand as identified to us by our consulting report from Hospitality Valuation Services. And in that, they identified that the marketplace would support a upper mid-scale limited select service hotel. And in doing so, we looked into the marketplace and identified companies that would build, own, and operate hotels in markets the size of Federal Way and would build these and operate these type of the products. In doing so, we then sent out that RFI, a request for interest. And in doing so, we received out of nearly 70 that we sent out, we received 12, which is a pretty good response in terms of the numbers. And we thought that that was far and wide a far better way than spending money on advertisement and doing a shotgun approach. And in doing so, we then subsequently continued on to the RFP process shortly thereafter in February and in March. And then on April 15th, the deadline, after what we expected would be somewhere between 3 to 5 responses, due to the changes in the marketplace, particularly the competition in hotel development, meaning simply that there are so many opportunities out there right now for building hotels and corresponding rooms that it was very intriguing for both the mayor's chief of staff and I, who had been working this, that we would get one. But we did, and this was a company that we had met a year ago, August, who had explored, and they'll provide you with the background of how they got to Federal Way and their interest in this, in our proposal and our project. But what's important about it is that, as you can see from the information that has been provided to you tonight, they've taken a very serious look at Federal Way, and I think it's important and incumbent upon me to provide this information to you that while we were looking for a hotel, we got a whole lot more, and you can tell it by the level of sophistication that they've presented and the amount of money that they've spent to get here this evening. So I hope that with that, you understand the importance of this discussion this evening. For the purposes of those who are watching on television and for everybody else, the piece of property that we're looking at is adjacent to the Performing Arts Center, directly to its eastern location. That is between South 316th and South 314th, and between 20th and 23rd Streets. And so with that, in the staff report, we identified to you a variety of different elements, and particularly those that would respond to the RFP. And their responses fulfilled the requirement of the RFP, which I'm proud to tell all of you. And as we move forward with this process and look into this project, I'm sure that there'll be a variety of other questions that you'll have, certainly. But one of the things that we learned going through this process real quickly, because of the competitive market and the comments that were received back through the marketplace, there was 2 things that we did not do. The first one was we did not ask any of the respondents to provide a development pro forma, because the cost associated with that would have just prohibited us from getting any kind of response. And we learned that, and the marketplace told us that. The second component that we learned from this was we had to provide a sufficient amount of time for people to respond. And that wasn't meaning that we could turn this around in less than 30 days. So this was almost a 90-day process for us going through that. And it proved fruitful because it enabled us to get a tremendous amount of input, and also to be able to answer a tremendous amount of questions from interested parties as we went through this. With that, I'm sure the reason why everybody is here this evening is to get a handle on what this proposal is all about. Again, the proposal comes from a company in the Big Sky country of Montana, Bozeman, Montana, Cadius Partners. And they are teamed with a group of others that I will have them introduce you to. But they're going to make a presentation. They're going to take you through 2 PowerPoint presentations. Greg Allen is the principal of Cadius Partners, and he's going to walk you through the business points and the marketplace and some history of how he got to Federal Way and why he thinks this is such a great opportunity. And then he's going to introduce his colleague and define better for you the components of what make up this proposal. So with that, Mayor and Council, I give you Greg Allen of Cadius Partners.
Thank you, Tim, and Mayor, Council, thank you for the opportunity to present our proposal to you this evening. Just some background, as Tim indicated, we started looking at Federal Way actually probably 2.5 years ago as a potential market for a hotel. A development partner that we had worked through with some shopping center co-locations had given us some sites that he was working on for shopping centers, and one of the sites was just on the other side of the freeway at 320th and I-5 on the northeast corner there as a site that he was looking at. And my partner, Bob Guston, who I need to apologize for tonight, his wife had a medical situation that had to be dealt with over the last couple days. She's a cancer survivor. They were worried about some tests she had, but I'm glad to say he just talked to me about an hour ago that the test came back negative, so she's all clear. But he felt he needed to stay home and deal with that this evening, so I apologize for that. But he had sent them to me. He said, Greg, take a look at these. We're very interested. They're interested in developing with them. And having been through this market, looking at several different locations through here, told Bob, I said, you know, he had Marysville up north. He had different locations. This one here in Federal Way is really the only thing that piques my interest. Having looked at the market, I knew the developers who had done the Hampton Inn back when it was originally built, so we were very interested in the market. And as time progressed and we looked at, had the land over there under contract and various other things, I'm not quite sure how I became aware of this proposal, but Tim and I talked, and I said, well, I like that site a whole lot better, but what I do know is we really want to be in this market. So I said, we're happy to put a proposal forward for the development of the site. And see where that goes, and keep our options open on the other side of the freeway, which we have. So with that in mind, what we did with our slide presentation, let me get it up here, find the mouse, just sort of followed our proposal and your RFP guidelines there. And basically, first things talked about the project schedule. This is a fairly aggressive schedule that we have here. It's predicated on a lot of things happening with the city as far as if we were accepted to go through the approval process of negotiating the purchase price and terms for the land, getting through the site design concepts, working with the city, architects, et cetera, to develop that plan. And begin construction sometime around March of next year, and then complete it sometime around May of the following year. Typically, these are taking ideally 12 months. I don't see a whole lot of hotels done in 12 months anymore. This gives us, I think, roughly, 14, 15 months to complete it, and I think that's a realistic time frame. Generally speaking, as we say at the bottom, Mother's Day is a good target time. You're just getting into the summer. We like a little soft opening period to get our systems, operational systems down without having sell out every night. It just benefits us to get through that process. As you go later into the year, what your summertime allows you to do is build up operational reserves for your shoulder seasons, which run into the fall and then over the winter, and then you come back out of it in the spring. So as you get later into a starting period, it's not negative so much from a construction standpoint as it is really from a cash flow standpoint as an operator, and just the amount of cash we need to keep on hand in reserves for operational purposes. The concept we have, I think the RFQ said a limited service, possibly a select service. We feel the market is more appropriate for what we call a lifestyle or select service type brand rather than a limited service. So on the slide you'll see we have Hyatt Place, AC, Hyatt Centric, DoubleTree, and Hilton Garden Inn. Those are most likely our target brands. It's a Marriott, a Hilton, and a Hyatt branding products. DoubleTree, there's one up by the airport, but they allow you quite a bit of flexibility with what we call a semi-full service hotel, and we can soft brand it, which means it doesn't say DoubleTree, maybe it says Federal Way Hotel or Town Center, you know, whatever. It allows us to kind of give it its unique character. a little bit more. Hyatt Centric and AC would be along the same lines, giving us a little more flexibility. The Garden Inn is more of a prototypical corporate structure. Typically, you handle your food service in-house, and that's something we're trying to get away from. But again, we're looking at 120 to 140 rooms. We like glass and a more contemporary feel because even though the prototypes are still, I would think, dated most of the time with their design concepts, we'd like to push that design forward a little bit to kind of anticipate where design is going. Part of the benefit of that is as we look forward to the future, typically you get a 20-year licensing agreement with the hotel company, be it Marriott or Hilton or Hyatt. And then at the end of 20 years, you hope you can get renewed for another 20 years to continue operating under the same brand structure. By anticipating kind of where design and where room sizing and features are going, we hopefully position ourselves to be able to get that extension on our franchise after 20 years, given the investment that we're making. Again, lobbies kind of vary. Our design and our plan is not to have any guest rooms on the first floor, which is typical in a suburban hotel, but to keep all of our guest rooms off the first floor and reserve the first floor for back of house, lobby, meeting rooms, assembly space, restaurant, breakfast areas, et cetera. We're very broad on our room mix. We will most likely go through another feasibility study here if we're selected to kind of narrow down our choices and zero in on what anticipated room rates are, which should guide us in our brand selection. But it's a typical mix, standard kings, double queens, and then some studios, and obviously the required 88 units of every unit type. So amenity concepts, with the Performing Arts Center, we don't see an overwhelming need for a lot of meeting space in this particular hotel, given the synergies that we hope to achieve with the Performing Arts Center in their meeting space. So we'd probably be on the lower end of that spectrum of 650 to 2,000 square feet. One of the new things coming on are media rooms that can be used for wired meetings with video conferencing and stuff for people who are having meetings. And so we'd be looking at some smaller rooms for that, most likely within the hotel, instead of larger meeting rooms. Pools are starting to, it's one of the drawbacks we have. People like hot tubs some, and people like pools. As an operator, we don't really ever like either. Especially hot tubs, to be honest, but it's something that's out there. Some of the new brands like AC and DoubleTree with their new product are not requiring pools. They're not widely used by a business traveler. If we went to our hotels, they're very rarely used. The designs are getting more difficult every year with ADA requirements increasing. It gets harder to make them fit in the space that's allotted for it because they're not an income center, they're not a revenue generator, and so I think we're looking at pools usually that are 30 by 30 feet or 30 by 40. They're very, very small nowadays. So with our Hamptons we put in, we're required them obviously with a resort hotel, or if you're in a resort area, you want an outdoor pool or something. This is not that type of environment, so we may or may not include that. One of the things we do focus on is an increased size fitness area beyond the standard 400 to 600 square feet. We'd probably be looking at more than 1,000 square feet here with possibilities of a sauna and steam rooms or something along those lines. Again, more geared towards a business traveler who wants that workout before their workday starts and give them a more home style type of a facility versus, something they go to their health club at home versus this typical hotel exercise room. So that's what we'll be looking at there. As far as food service goes, again, with some of the brands, Hilton, Hyatt, or Hilton Garden Inn and Hyatt, you're usually required to provide a certain type of breakfast, and the restaurant is very stereotypical of your hotel food. I don't believe this site calls for that type of a product. I think that given our design and the direction we're going with the possible rooftop penthouse for a restaurant or a lounge, what we'd be looking for is a third-party operator for the restaurant. That's really not our forte. Running a hotel restaurant for conventions and stuff, it's very run-of-the-mill food. It doesn't excite people. What we're looking for is really, given the location, a restaurant that has its own identity, that will be a draw in and of itself. So not so much a hotel restaurant, but a restaurant that is within a hotel that, again, has its own possible entrance, but definitely its own identity, and a third-party person that we'd work with for our restaurant. And again, hopefully be able to work with the Performing Arts Center for their food needs over there, as well as, you know, banqueting and whatever other things they may do with weddings, et cetera. So that would be our preference as far as a restaurant goes. One of the things when we designed the hotel was to look at the views of Mount Rainier. As you get up on that site, I think anything, our architect and I were up there today, I think anything from the second floor up is just gonna have outstanding views of Mount Rainier. And we really feel that's a key feature. The sight lines are really incredible, and we really want to maximize that with the design of the hotel and hopefully the placement of a restaurant as well. Getting into financing, we work with a variety of banks and equity partners on every deal. We have a typical stable of investors that we work with. Different markets interest some people more than others. You know, returns, we have a certain return ratio we're trying to target for them. Typically, though, each deal is set up as a single purpose entity for that particular project. In the 4 hotels that Bob and I have done together, there's probably 60 to 70% of the same people. It's just, we know what they like. We're looking for those products and those situations. And so that's typically what happens. National banks we've worked with, US Bank, Wells Fargo. We're looking for the best rates, best terms as anybody else, as a city or any person looks for. We're just looking for the best opportunity to get us into our projects. We typically don't over leverage our properties. We stay in the 60 to 65% ratio for leverage. That allows you to really weather any ups and downs in the market, no matter what may happen. I think when we opened a Hampton Inn over in Spokane Valley a few years back, and I think one month we did 30% occupancy, and we still turned a profit based on what we had in it. So, you know, we were able to cash flow positive. And that's an important thing. We're going into kind of an untested market here in Federal Way. I mean, we have the Hampton, we have the Courtyard. It is a good market from that standpoint, but we're trying to stretch that market into a little nicer product and really kind of anchor with the Performing Arts Center, that downtown core, if you will, that town center. So the necessity of really not carrying too much debt on the property and making sure that we can weather some early maybe friction or resistance against the product as we get the area around it developed, I think is very critical. Typically hotels, like we said, is 75 to 125 full-time equivalents during construction. That's local construction workers or subcontractors, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, framers. And then you get into your supply houses, and then you get into your manufacturing for toilet fixtures, toilet accessories, kitchen equipment, et cetera. So there's a lot of jobs generated during construction. And then given the size, you're probably looking at roughly 25 to 30, maybe 35 full-time employees, housekeeping, general manager, hotel at 120 to 140, probably a sales manager and a couple assistant sales managers on that side of the business, front desk manager, housekeeping manager, which are all decent salaries. And what we do typically is all the performance is tied to, or excuse me, their wages are a base, and then they're tied to performance to incentivize them to keep the hotel functioning efficiently and at a high standard as well. So, and a lot of that ties into our TripAdvisor scores and to, again, to revenue and just overall guest satisfaction and the quality of the product that we're providing. with that, tourist promotion, sorry about that. As a hotel, it's really hard to drive tourism if you're not in a resort area. What we do try to do is provide a hotel that when people come and they say, you know what, we stayed at the hotel, Cadius's hotel or whatever hotel it is that we own, and it was just an outstanding experience. The front desk staff was wonderful. The room was clean. The meal I had was great. We want to stay there again. That's how we really contribute to tourism, because those people spending nights in our beds, they eat at the restaurants in the area, they shop at the stores, they go to the movie theater. So those are things that we're really, really looking at. And as we look at Federal Way, what we looked at the town center as really just a blank canvas. Federal Way's a new town, and it doesn't have a established core. And that really, for us, looked at a opportunity to really create something unique that reflects the region, but reflects Federal Way's developing its own identity and being a part of that, and which is why we had a broader concept of understanding the grand staircase and how it really tied the two levels of this upper kind of podium area where the hotel site and the Performing Arts Center are, and then the Town Square Park and the transit facility, really trying to create something that seems seamless and creates a public space where people want to linger, because again, that drives traffic for us in our facilities. So to us, all that plays into tourism and creating this environment. What we did is we designed kind of a whole area. We felt it really develops our understanding of what we're wanting to do with the hotel, and our desire to possibly work further with some of the multifamily and other buildings that are in the area, because again, we see this as an opportunity. And I think being from out of the area, perhaps we look at this from a different standpoint than people who live here. I have friends who live out here that, it's Federal Way, or it's Auburn, and I look at it and say, well, here we're in the South County, you got access to freeways, you got Pack Highway, you got I-5, you got the Kent Valley, you can get a lot of places easily, you can get to the airport easily from here. There's a lot of reasons to stay here, even if you're working in Tacoma and down south of here. Again, if you got to get out early in the morning to the airport, it's an easy place to access that from. And again, you go up Valley, it's easy. There's just, to me, there's some synergies here. I think the Weyerhaeuser site, with them selling out, I think it's a great opportunity. There's 420 acres there. It was underutilized. It's a beautiful piece of property, but I see so many opportunities to put a lot more different businesses in there, and I think industrial real estate will really tap into those resources and create something that really is a job generator here for this area. So we're really excited about the possibility. I'm going to pass it over to Jeff Downhour. He's one of the principals with our architect.
Okay. So I've been told already I have to go through this quickly. So this is really about vision and our attempt to project into the future and really bring something more than just a hotel, although a great hotel facility, to this potential site. We've worked with Greg a long time. And we work with Greg primarily because we have a really common vision for design. And we have a really common goal of making better communities. And we try to do that with all of our work. All the pictures you'll see, this is a project we just completed in Uptown Butte, Montana. We always think of our project team as a big part of the team is always the communities we're working in. It's all the stakeholders, whether it's the city commission or it's the council, whether it's other advocacy groups, the Chamber of Commerce. We try to bring everybody into the fold. So part of this project would be figuring out how to deal with and work with and bring everybody into this project to get that valued input. It's something we've been doing for about 25 years now, for quite a long time. That's another project we did, really close to a master planning project we did in Helena. This is the Montana State Fund building. Just kind of an example of some of the architectural work that we do. We always start with kind of deciding what our goals and guiding principles are, and this is where the work with the City of Federal Way comes in. We want to make sure that we have a common vision for this project, At this point, we have taken the information we've gotten and we've tried to project that vision and tried to understand what you are, but the kickoff of this project would be really getting to town here. We usually set up an office in town and really work with local people and try to understand that vision a little more clearly. The other thing we bring is a passion for great design. It really is the key to making projects successful. It doesn't mean high-end design, doesn't mean elaborate design. It just means really good, thoughtful, community-oriented design. This is a sketch we did 20 years ago for Helena, Montana. This was a blank piece of property. And it's kind of remarkable to see it now. We have, this is the Great Northern Town Center. In the bottom part there, we had showing a carousel. We have a carousel. It's moved over a little ways. We have a children's science center. We have a hotel there. We have several restaurants. We have a 10-screen theater. We have a parking garage. We have probably 5 or 6 different office buildings. And this was all done in Helena, Montana with a vision of an absolutely barren piece of ground that was the old rail depot. And it started with this sketch. A couple of views of what it looks like now. There are actually still some development going on. The upper left there, we have an amphitheater there with a waterfall and a replication of some of Lewis and Clark's journeys through Montana. You can kind of see the carousel on the lower right. Again, the design of it's allowed it to become a real center for community events. We also do a lot of just more standard architectural work. We do a lot of urban buildings, surprising for Montana, but we work a lot in city centers where we have 0 lot line buildings. We also do a lot of work on campuses, so we do a lot of landscape design work, and that's kind of why it was so much fun to take a look at this staircase. It was really terrific. So I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes on our design proposal, and I'm sure you'll have some questions when we're done. There's the hotel we kind of highlighted. What we did, we really feel that a building is not a building on its own. Every time we put a building on a site, we create all the space around it. And we can either create great space, or we can create neutral space, or we can create bad space. So we were really compelled with this project by the opportunity to create great public space by putting this building in the right location, along with some of the other things you're looking at doing here. So it was once said that the problem with a lot of cities is there's no there. And we really feel like this project is all about starting the process, the next step after the Performing Arts Center, of creating a there. So you can see we've located the hotel in this location right here and started to work with the landscape and the forms and the public space that go along with the Performing Arts Center. So our keys things we want to accomplish, and again, this would be reiterated with our workshops in town, but we want to make sure it's visually inviting, it's walkable and connected, it has mixed use, and a really critical one, density and destination. This needs to be a place where you intend to go to and has adequate density to make it attractive. People want to see people, and people want to be seen. And there's, of course, this connected uses of public space. And we've worked pretty hard on this so far here. There's more work to do, but we feel that's really, really critical in this project. So one of the other things to do is we try to relate all public projects, no matter how big things are, they come down to how people live. So we relate a lot of things to houses, even though we don't really do houses. But the first thing we look at is what's the curb appeal? How do you draw people to this place? We think of a sequence. You see, you arrive, and then you park. Too many places now you park, and you have no sense of arrival. And then you figure out where you're going. We want to flip that around a little bit. So the idea of curb appeal. This idea of invitation. This front stair is really about an invitation. You can see on this piece here how you can take even ramp ways and integrate ramps with these beautiful sets of stairs and have access for all and this beautiful public space that is both a walking corridor as well as a hangout space. We consider this would be your town stoop. It's where everybody meets. It's where you walk by. It's where you see people hanging out. As you get up a little higher, you have the front porch, and that's where activities begin to happen, where we create the idea of you can have public zones where you would have tie-in with the beautiful things that you're doing out here and extend that. So again, you can have events out there. And then that connects to the most classic element of all, which is the main street. And in this case, we want to make sure there's activity fronting that main street and not parking lots. So in this case, we put the hotel and that idea of a lobby and a restaurant as one of the centerpieces of Main Street. So that's the plan. I'm sure you've seen it. It's, again, it's pretty preliminary, but has a lot of things that we like. We try to enhance the drop-off for the Performing Arts Center. We try to really activate this street with buildings. We're really focused again on this stair as a way to increase the visibility in there and draw people. And then we would like to see parking off to the side, whether it's way off to the side off the site or in the far secondary corners of the site. And then we see a kind of a mix of mixed-use buildings throughout the area. And again, trying to make it an urban context so there is a real centerpiece to the town. And again, that's just a blow up of the actual hotel site. So what we'd have is the roundabout here. We'd have a quick drop off from that for the hotel here. And then this would all be public hotel space that opens up. There's been some talk about some connection here. We would see this could have an awning that you could walk under if you wanted to connect to here. We also thought there could be just these temporary beautiful tent connectors if you ever really wanted people to be able to walk from one to the other. You don't necessarily see a permanent connection, but you could do some wonderful things with setting up temporary festival tents and those sorts of things out front. And it takes up, again, you can see fairly limited amount of property at this point. We would see when this garage is put in that you could, again, this may be parking in the first phase, and then if you get a garage, then you could take that over with another street front building. Then we went ahead and we created a model. I should have just had the model you can spin all around and fly around of our vision. And again, this is just a first run vision. It was a lot of fun, and we're really trying to convey the idea. How do you inspire? We find with all projects, it's finding the inspiration. If you have the inspiration, people will get behind it, and if people get behind it, things will happen. That's a view from, an aerial view obviously from the southwest. This is from the southeast, and again, this is the stair and the hotel, the Performing Arts Center. And we kept seeing this as a large public building, and we're not exactly sure what that is. But again, this front, we have a beacon at this corner already that's going to be magnificent. We see another beacon right at the main intersection point, which would be this piece here, and then potentially another calling card beacon at the southeast corner. Looking up the street on axis with the stair, and again, you can see how that stair would open up the views to the rest of everything that's up there. A little closer in view, and again, this is where we see you could integrate, again, all sorts of access points in terms of ramps and stuff getting up to the top, areas to sit, areas to plant, a real gathering space for the whole community. A little closer in view. This is a view from the north side looking. This is the hotel, and again, you would be able to pull in here. You know, we're not real big fans of having a lot of car-only spaces. Obviously, the streets are, but otherwise, we like to make spaces that can be used by cars, that can be used by people who walk. We have a couple of these areas in Helena where you drive into parking garages and stuff across pedestrian ways, and they really can make great space. That could happen also at that drop-off area for the Performing Arts Center. That doesn't need to be a paved way. It could all be pavers, and it could have a huge tent on there sometimes of the year. It could be a drop-off other times of the year. So again, that's looking south. And if we tilted this way and had a clear sky, you'd see an incredible view of Rainier, of course. We were asked to kind of give it a sense for the design. You know, we see something more on the modern side. I think we want to be sympathetic to the Performing Arts Center. It's such an incredible community investment. We don't want to alienate that at all, but we don't also want to mimic it. So this is just kind of an initial run at that. We see, again, a lot of glass and openness. That sense of invitation on the street level is really what's important. We don't want a lot of blank wall. We want active zones along the street and along the front of the building. And there could very well be dining areas out there and tables and chairs and benches and all those things that activate public space. And that's it. I realize that's a big vision. We threw a lot in there, and we did it in a fairly short amount of time. But again, we stepped back and really thought about what was this project about. when we see these projects work, again, they're because people get behind the vision and the community gets behind the vision, and so we try to prevent something that was compelling and would benefit everyone.
Great. Gentlemen, great job. Councilmember Sepidawson.
Thank you. Sorry I was late. But, okay, so I was actually going to ask if the design was going to complement the pack, but you just said something about mimicking, so I don't know.
I would say, well, we would complement it, we would not mimic it, but we'd want to be sympathetic with the fact that it's a more modern, streamlined building. Rather than putting something next to it that was more traditional looking, I think that would be a little bit offsetting. And we tend to think the hotel brands we're looking at would also be more appropriately done in a more modern building style.
Okay. And also, the entrance to the hotel is on the other side and not the side of the pack. Is that something you would consider so they can somehow have it shared?
The entrance, there's really two entrances. You're coming up the stairs for an entrance that pedestrians say is coming from the transit center. They're coming up. And then the drive aisle is coming off the street frontage there with the canopy drop off. The problem is we're trying to create a street frontage on this main access through 3 and 5, and you have your back of house, your laundry and other services. And so you can't have 4 fronts, so you're trying to create a spot where that back of house stuff would be, and we would see that in that parking lot zone where he is pointing to, kind of to the back side of the Performing Arts Center. And so you can't really put the entry there, otherwise your back of house would be on what we're kind of envisioning as a entry point coming into the property from 14th along that stair and promenade.
We would see, yeah, both of these two sides as public sides, so there could very well be entries here. That drop-off, obviously, because we can only drive to here, would be, we see as being on this point. It could be shared here, that's not out of the question. Certainly, whether or not the drop-off is here or here, this becomes a glass open space with entries into the building. So you could, if you were in here and you were heading to the Performing Arts Center, there would be we'd want a very graceful connection. And again, this area is the area I'm talking about. I've shown it because you had it paved before. This could, in my mind, be all pavers and be almost look like a plaza that you drove across to drop people off. So it would feel very comfortable to walk across.
And I did go to the Ruston, Tacoma area, and I think it's what you designed, and it's really beautiful. So thank you very much for this presentation, and I look forward to your project.
All right, great. Councilmember Maloney, then Councilmember Duclos.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the presentation as well. I'm wondering about some of the aspects of this that you weren't sure about yet. When will you know for sure? At what stage will you know who the hotel partner will be or who the restaurant partner will be? And also the grander vision. When does that decision get made?
So basically, until we get selected, it's hard to select a hotel chain because then we have to go through additional feasibility. We have to look at, what's our room mix, what's our room count. I mean, I'm pretty confident in what we have there. There's discussions already. I've been on the phone 5 or 6 times with Hilton trying to determine what brand might fit. There's some restrictions they put on brands in certain markets, so I really like their Canopy brand, but this is probably, until this whole vision were to built out, they'd probably say that doesn't fit the Canopy brand. So could we do something Canopy-like with the DoubleTree? I think we could, but it's something that we would face less resistance to. So once we're selected, we would start working through that and fine-tuning what those things are and what the brand would be. One of the things we don't want to do is set our mark on a brand too low so we can't pursue higher rates as time goes by. Obviously, in this market, for instance, if I were to choose a Holiday Inn Express, there'd most likely be a cap on what I could generate for income, which is why it's not even considered. So we're looking at things that we felt that will allow us to drive rate over an extended period of time. Getting to the grander vision, one of the things we think is very important for the hotel from the inception would be the grand staircase, not only for the hotel but for the PAC. to have that connection to the lower level park and to the transit center. Without that, it really feels detached. We were out there today, and you got this barrier, and you have this narrow stairwell that comes down. It really feels removed, and we feel that needs to be on a very front end phase of what would happen. The remainder of it really comes in, for if it's a public building and how that would fit into the city's plans, or apartments and condominiums. It's market demand, but I feel like in this market, as this transit-oriented development evolves, it's a product I think that could easily be built right away. But you can't just go in and build everything at once. You kind of have to work your way through the property and come up with these concepts, as Jeff said, as we work through a really design concept of how the pieces interact together, because we want this to create something that's really an anchor for the town. And it's important for us as a hotel developer to have that there, because if we came in and the staircase didn't get built and the PAC was sitting up there, it would be a struggle to make that hotel work. And so we really want that interaction to be there from the get-go.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Duclos, then Councilmember Hunt.
Well, Councilmember Maloney answered my first question, so I'll go to my second one. Great minds. So you put this together as the team? You bring in the contractors and everybody else to build it and all of that, or how does that work?
Yes. Basically, we go through the design with our architect. We go, work with you to purchase the property. We go through our numbers. We get our investors together. We can either look at qualified contractors in this region who work on hotels and say, okay, we're going to go out to a select bid. Or we can say, you know what, we want to work with you early to make sure our costs are in line, and we can go, don't really call it design build. It's really a guaranteed maximum price with a construction management element, which involves some pre-construction. We could work on those bases. Really kind of depends on what information we're looking through for that process. Are we overdone on our design? Are we missing something? Is there our costs way out from what we perceive them to be? So that kind of evolves as we work through the design. Pricing becomes a big issue. The one we did in Salinas, California, we bid that out during a very low time in the market. And had we done it on a non-competitive bid prices, our price probably would have been $1 million more, but we ended up with very hungry contractors who were willing. So it just sort of timing and a lot of different elements that you kind of play as we go through design. Do we need other input and work through that? But we've worked a lot with Jeff, and we're very confident in their competency and the team that they put together.
Now, once the hotel site is defined, that becomes a piece of the pie that's relatively straightforward in terms of Greg managing, finding the contractors and managing that process. When you get into the other adjacent pieces, that'll have to be worked out with other partnerships, or whether they're public-private partnerships, or how those pieces are done. But there will be a lot defined for the hotel. That's just something will have to be part of the process. That's a very standalone. How much partnering there is on other pieces of it, that'll have to be kind of worked out as those opportunities arrive. So I don't think we have a really clear, that'd be outside of the scope of the RFP, but we certainly want to work very closely with you in finding the best way to get some of those things done.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Hunt, and then Councilmember Moore.
Thank you very much. You're talking about having a restaurant in the hotel, and the PAC is also talking about having a full-service kitchen. I heard you mention something about catering for the PAC. So if the PAC has a full-service kitchen, how would that fit into your overall plan?
Well, what typically would happen is, you're going to do maybe some prep off-site. So anytime you're coming up and setting up for an event that's fairly large, you're going to need a kitchen there, or and I think there's been talk with having a culinary arts school that may be working in the PAC. I don't know what that was all involved, but I've heard discussions of that. And so maybe they're using it full time. Well, that's fine, but you usually have a prep kitchen or warm-up kitchen so that you can get the final preparation before you bring out food for whatever presentation it is and a place to work out of. So it's not one or the other, obviously. I mean, the PAC may have its needs to have that permanent kitchen there, and that's kind of a standalone thing. But if we were catering for an event there, which Not to say that we'd be the exclusive caterer, but we may ask to have use of that for that time period if it was possible. And that's just something that has to be worked out with them when that time comes and as the design gets worked through.
Okay, this looks like it's on both the Target property and the PAC property, is that true? It's on both sides?
That's what I hear, yes. I think it straddles that line.
So how does that work? Do you need,
Is a day here, a day. We've got,
There would be a boundary line adjustment process, and
Okay.
we would change the boundaries potentially of the PAC property. It would just depend on what we decide to do.
okay. The timeline for the hotel, I see that, but for the rest of the development of the rest of the property, what do you see?
You know, once we get into it, our preference would just be to be able to work from one project to the next, to the next, to the next. I mean, that's the most efficient thing for us to do. But we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the economies are. We don't know the situation for the city for public building. There's been discussion about Washington State University possibly having a satellite campus building. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces. I think we're talking boundary line adjustments. We may be even talking additional lot lines, maybe subdividing it a little more to get different pieces in there to create sellable pieces that are smaller, only because you build a building and you don't want it to be all condominiumized on the dirt or some lease on the dirt. You want people to be able to own their structure and the dirt underneath it. So it's hard to project out how all that would come together, but again, the quicker activity is centered in this area, the more successful the hotel for us will be. So if we were to build condominiums and apartments, it's the same thing. We're gonna go in there, we're gonna want restaurants, and we're gonna want retail. We're gonna want activity to really happen in that zone. Otherwise, we lose the steam, and then we're just gonna be sitting up here on this little corner of a property with nothing happening. So it's very important for people, once they grasp the vision, for us to be able, and the community to be able to keep moving the development forward, so they see that this is not something that just a pipe dream we got 2 pieces of done, but that other things are happening, and this is really changing this area of the city.
Okay, so you've built 4 hotels?
I built 4 hotels. I actually come from a construction management background, so before that I actually managed the construction of about another 6 over time, plus been involved in the development of others that not so directly as those 4.
Okay, thank you very much.
all right, Councilmember Moore. And then, Councilmember Duclos, back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Great job on the presentation. Certainly, this really, I think, captures the excitement of Federal Way moving forward and building more of a modern city, which I like. That being said, I know that there's future plans for the performing arts to perhaps host some solar energy. And obviously, the way we build this building, for me, is really important, and making sure that it's energy efficient and utilizes perhaps in this, in your buildings of these number of buildings, solar energy. So do you foresee any of that happening, or just being innovative and using green-friendly, I'm not your environmentalist or scientist, but I care about our environment, and so I don't know the right terminologies here, so I can be more specific in an email, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
That
we
would be
certainly anticipate it being a very sustainable construction process. At times, that makes a lot of sense to include actually active solar. That's especially effective on something like a parking garage. We've actually had several case studies where they use the solar panels as a shading device for the upper level, and you could provide actually an abundance of power for a parking garage. Multi-story hotel, you don't get the same proportion because you have a lot smaller roof. But all the projects we work on are quite sustainable. I mean, my house is LEED Platinum, if you're familiar with LEED. So I've got solar panels and roof gardens and the whole works. So we do that pretty much in most of our projects. The ones you've seen, we just put a 30 kilowatt PV array on a project we did in Yellowstone National Park. We just completed last fall, and that's actually working out really quite well. And that's a housing project. So, that kind of thing is certainly part of that design process, studying whether it's simply high-end mechanical systems, it's geothermal, photoelectric. You know, you kind of have to go down that list and analyze what's the better system to use in this particular situation. And solar electric is becoming, you know, obviously, you know, much more competitive, even than it was, you know, 5 or 6 years ago. So it's becoming really attractive on a lot of projects.
Yeah, I'd be curious in future concepts that come out. I'd be curious to see how that plays a role in this. And then my last question, Mr. Mayor, is, you know, obviously you guys have had a long history of working on hundreds of projects. You know, can you describe if you've had any relationships with community workforce agreements that you've had to work with, and add apprenticeships to your construction jobs? I mean, have you had that experience?
We're typically in Montana, outside of a few select areas, a non-union area, and so you get into these different wage structures. Obviously, a community building might require Davis-Bacon wages and certain things like that, and those are certainly things that we would adhere to through the process, and understanding the need for that. Apprenticeships and different things like that really depends on the contractors. How, you know, there's some markets where you can have union shops and non-union shops, and they work hand in hand together, and they work very well. In other markets, it doesn't work very well. So apprenticeship, I mean, to me, I have a nephew who's an apprentice plumber. I have another nephew who's a electrical apprentice. So it's how they get trained. To me, it's a very important part of the education process. I don't think everybody's meant or plans to go to college, and I think the skilled trades of mechanical systems, electrical systems, things like that, there's a shortage of qualified people for. So yes, apprenticeships and those things need to be a part of it. How they integrate in is tough, because it's not necessarily a learning environment as, well, we're going to set this off as a learning project for people to learn and incorporate these things in. But individual contractors, trades, they determine kind of how they bring those people in. And, you know, we typically, we're not in Montana, everybody works really well together. In California, where we've worked it's a non-union area. You get up further in the Bay Area, there is more unions. So it just depends. But, you know, we've looked at projects being funded by unions. So it isn't a negative or a positive. The market for union labor, et cetera, has really changed, because they know the need to be competitive. So it isn't necessarily that union wages are here and you know, non-union is down here. It's really balanced out a lot, and just really just depends on what the needs of the market are, and again, the type of project it is.
Great.
Does that help?
Yeah. Our last large project in Butte, we had selected a non-union contractor and just required union cooperation, and they hired all union subs. That worked really well. We did another project in Butte where we had the earthwork and a lot of the site work done by the local Job Corps trainees. That was a little more complicated to organize, but perhaps, you know, there's some other, you have to understand what the skill level is there and what an appropriate role is for those sorts of groups. But we've done several other projects that had a lot of donated labor or job force sort of labor brought in as training. We do a house every year that the high schoolers build in Helena, and we have to kind of oversee a bunch of high school kids a little bit building a house. So that kind of thing is pretty fun to incorporate, especially in the public portions of the project that perhaps don't have as tight a timeline as perhaps a commercial construction.
Very good. Okay.
Speaking of timelines, is this a timeline that you feel is reasonable and doable?
It's aggressive and to some extent just on the front end, not so much on the construction. I think once we're in there, you know, the construction can go relatively quick. The hotels are not complicated buildings.
Mm-hmm.
It's rooms stacked on top of each other. It's very, you know, all the dimensions are very set. So it's not that. It's really comes in the planning process, in the regulatory process of, okay, you know, how do we handle stormwater? How do we handle this? Is this being done right? Traffic studies, environmental studies, and all those things that may have to weigh in. It's nice to think that they all flow smoothly, but they may or may not, you know.
Oh, I know that.
You get to an agency that may just not want to work with you real easily. So, you know, that's where the city comes in. If it's an outside agency where you can really act as to help us get through the process quicker, but that's usually where things bog down, not so much in construction once we're going vertical.
Okay.
And from our point of view, it's similar. You notice that put the work on the steps, and that was back a little ways. You know, there just is a process for such a, you know, public project and how you get that completed. You know, you're gonna need more time to do those sorts of things. That doesn't mean we can't define and do the lot legal work to start the hotel, but there is gonna be a process with some of the other things that we know takes more time, and even with the little extra time on that, it's still fairly aggressive on that part of it. And I know you know that, seeing other city projects go, sometimes they can take a long time.
Well, no, actually, having built commercial residential properties myself, I know some of the issues.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Deputy Mayor Burbidge and then Councilmember Kopeck.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your presentation. I've enjoyed reviewing your materials and your ideas, looking at the potential for what they can bring to our downtown. And I do have some questions, though. I'm wondering, with the Performing Arts and Events Center being such a strong anchor for the site, I'm wondering both what your background and experience with this kind of a facility might have been, and whether or not you've had direct experience with that. I'm wondering also about the fact that we have so many, we have a wide range of tourism facilities in our city that bring folks to the city, and that we're expecting more extensions of people's stays here, partly because of those facilities. And with the events at the Performing Arts and Events Center, we're anticipating having a wide range of activities, including conferences over several day periods and that kind of thing. And I'd be interested in hearing any comments you might have with those considerations in terms of the use of the hotel, the nature of the hotel, and then any other aspects of the development.
You know, as architects, we don't do performing arts centers. That's not something you see a lot of in Montana. We do a lot of events venues, not nearly as sophisticated as the level you're looking at here. So we do understand events and travel and movement of people fairly well. You know, I think one of the keys when we talk about stakeholders in this, obviously that group, as well as the designers of the facility and the civil engineers and the landscape people worked on that, you know, they're really key stakeholders to the kickoff planning of defining this lot and how that impacts that facility. So, you know, it's not something where we can simply say that, well, that's a done deal and we're gonna butt into that parking lot. I think there's a whole process involved there. And how do we make things even better than what they were planning on? What would they do differently if they knew there was a very nice hotel facility with other facilities next door? So I think there's a little back and forth between that group is, to me, having put all that effort into it, they're an incredible resource, and I think that's what we'd rely on, and not pretend that we would know what's best for them. We need to let them tell us how to make that work for them, as well as we would give them our advice on what we think from a hotel standpoint would work best. So I think there's going to be some back and forth there, and I think the possibilities are that, to me, it becomes better for both facilities.
I think too, when we have events, a lot of times with our hotel in Salinas, and really in Spokane, they try to schedule events out over a period of time so that you don't have conflicting weekends. A few years ago, they had the Salinas, or the California Rodeo, which happens in Salinas, and another event in Monterey, and it bottlenecked everything, and people were going further and further out to find rooms up to 100 miles away. And so this year they went through the calendar. You got an extra weekend in March, was it, or April, excuse me. And so they redid their calendars so that these events were staggered out. I think that becomes a key, given that, you know, the quality rooms in this town are basically the Courtyard and the Hampton right now, and this, you know, would be the third quality, what I call a quality room. The Best Western is nice, but it's usually a tier down from these other products. And so the other thing would be, you know, if we're having a large event there, to kind of schedule our meetings around that so that those rooms can be available. If, for instance, somebody wanted to schedule a meeting that needed the Performing Arts Center, you're most likely looking at more rooms than we could provide in this one hotel. So you'd have to be working with the other hotels to provide the rooms for that event as well. And that typically happens behind the scenes on the operations side of how you schedule that, and our managers are usually fully involved in the Chamber of Commerce and all the visitation stuff, so that they can really look at, okay, when are my downtimes? When am I going to need to schedule a conference to fill rooms because I'm going to have tourism during this time and this time? And that's really just how they work together. And, you know, you compete against each other, but, you know, we all get reports. We know what each other's doing on a nightly basis. They'll give us their numbers. You know, it comes through a STAR report, which is Smith Travel Research, gives us all the numbers. And that's to really help all the hotels. Am I underpriced? Am I overpriced? Am I getting the right market share for my hotel? And again, to work together on these points in time to know when the high points are, when the low points are. But Performing Arts Center is really just any other venue. You know, whether it's a conference center in one hotel, but again, if you have a 20,000 square foot conference facility and a 200-room hotel, you may need more hotel rooms besides what you have in your facility. So it's the same concept.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Copan.
I want to thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation tonight. Reading through the proposal, it was obvious to me that you guys have done your homework. I think that you have an understanding of Federal Way that certainly indicates that, and I appreciate that. I think looking at this proposal, it's obvious that you want to do more than just a hotel, and you have a vision for the entire property. And again, something that to be able to put together a comprehensive plan about what our future looks like in the way that you have, I mean, I think it's exciting for us as a council, but also for the community. Getting to that, though, as far as doing the whole thing, I understand that you guys have done a lot of hotels, and you've got a track record there. What would you say would be the project that best indicates the potential for success with the entire project, if that was the direction that we went?
I think the City Hall building or the public building in the front is really a key to creating that area up in front that Jeff outlined, the 3, 5, 4, 6 in the one. You kind of create that plaza, that promenade and the stairs, and it really creates this public space and an anchor of this is Federal Way. Here's our public buildings, here's our square, here's our main hotel. And then as you move around from there, you know, whether 9 or 7 was a building for Washington State, I don't think that's necessary. You could probably pull in another office user. But I think, you know, we do multifamily as well, and I think what we're looking at 10 and 11, 12 is really getting into some multifamily housing. I think it's really critical not to just have traffic during the middle of the day, but at night as well. Not just hotel users who are only there for 2 or 3 nights, but people who live there, they function there. If you're staying in the hotel and there's a restaurant over in one of the buildings that are, you know, with the condominiums on the first floor retail, that you're interacting with people that live there. I mean, for me, part of the experience of travel is really interacting with the people in the community and not so much. I think the new millennial traveler or the younger traveler looks more for that. You know, the traditional thing was, I go to my Courtyard hotel and there's a list of sandwiches and I'm going to get my club sandwich and sit in my room and watch a sporting event on my bed, and very detached in their business travel. I think the new person wants to really interact with the community around them, and they want something that compels them to do that. And it really takes a mix of all uses, which is, I think, from the Great Northern Town Center. And I really think almost everything needs to be more mixed use than it is, because you become very isolated if it isn't. So
Yeah, in the town center, the catalyst there was, you don't have it in Washington, but it was a TIF district that was able to fund the parking garage and then just getting those first couple of projects off the ground as a catalyst. They also had some community organizations that built the Children's Science Center. Again, not nearly the scope and scale investment of the Performing Arts Center, but that and the carousel were done that way. So that was all done to make it a draw. And then there was one more grant that they received and we helped go after, and that was designing the public ways, and that was for the 200th anniversary of the Lewis and Clark expedition coming through Montana. So that gave them a few smaller projects that were the catalyst. So that's a really good example. The hotel there is, I think it's 110 rooms. And it does really quite well. It has associated Silver Star Steak Company, which is a local, very high-end, very successful bar restaurant. So it has a lot of the same things. It doesn't have any large public buildings associated with it, although after the fact, again, it started other development next to it. The federal courthouse, new courthouse went in right next door to the Great Northern Town Center. And then the Montana State Fund built their headquarters right next to that. And there's probably been 5 or 6 other projects within a block of that, again, that zone that were all just started by taking in, it's the exact same size. It's actually, it's 7 acres was the total property size. And it's amazing what you can do, because we overlaid the Walmart of Helena, and it was the exact same size as the entire Great Northern Town Center. And look what the community got for a tax base and a city center as opposed to the Walmart. That's exactly the same size you have here, actually. So.
I think also, when we look to the west, there's that whole vacant thing. I think there's a Korean restaurant, then there's a vacant grocery store. The shopping center behind this property is certainly on the tail end of its usable lifespan, if you will. So there's a really a big opportunity to really expand this very quickly around it, as I think as certain wheels start turning, people are going to say, okay, I have this outdated strip center with, you know, a yoga class and a cobbler and empty storefronts, or I can tear this down and build, you know, 2,000 units of condominiums or whatever that number may be. And again, then that gets more restaurants and more retailers that are pedestrian friendly. So it takes a catalyst, and then it takes just other people around it saying, oh, there's more we can do here, and really creating, I think, again, to me, because it's a new city and it doesn't have a down court, you don't have to worry about, or downtown, you don't have this historic core you have to worry about or other things. It really allows you to create something very unique and special that really becomes Federal Way in a very impactful way.
Good. Thank you. We've got a follow-up question by
Just a quick comment. Be careful what you say. Millenniums are not the only ones. I have traveled around this country on business trips for a nonprofit, and the last thing I wanted to do was stay in my hotel room at night.
I'm the same way. So
I went to the shopping stores, I went to the malls, I went to the restaurants, I went any place I could but my hotel room until it was almost time to go to bed.
Right.
Right, exactly. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you so much. Just one last question. Again, I love everything you're saying, and I appreciate you talking about the next generation of people and whatnot. So I know on one of your slide pages you talked about a pedestrian-friendly area, and I know that's what you've been talking about throughout this presentation. Any thoughts that have occurred about building bicycle areas or places to park your bike, or is that not a question to ask yet, and more towards down the road? But I figured now's the time to ask.
No, I think it would just be part of the development plan. I know in Helena and the Great Northern, we have designated bicycle areas. Every building has to have bicycle parking within 50 feet of the front door. I don't know about the surrounding pathway, how you get to here on bicycles, obviously. If we have, like we do parking garages, we always tend to have a designated defensible, lockable space for individual bikes. So I think that again, is quite, especially out here, it's quite important. There certainly is the potential for a large amount of bike traffic year-round. We have quite a bit in Helena, even though it's not as year-round as you have here, but it's become pretty successful.
All right.
Sometimes integrating pedestrian bicycle uses is a little tough, like on the stairs, you know.
Mountain bikes would be fine.
Yeah, mountain bikes would be fine except for the person sitting on the stairs, but you know, that's, I mean, obviously you're in an area where we're trying to create foot traffic and bicycle traffic and eliminate vehicular traffic. So anything that does that is what you know, you ride your bike over to the Commons. You may not walk to the Commons, but I think you'd ride your bike over there, you know, because it's 4 blocks and people get a little lazy about that. But
Riding back up the hill's the issue.
right.
All right. Great presentation. We're very, very excited about this. We've got a little business to do. And actually, if you stick around for the big meeting here in about 15 minutes, we'll make sure you get introduced.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Great presentation. We've got executive session right now pursuant to RCW 4230-1101C, sale or lease of property, and then potential litigation pursuant to 4230-11011. And we will be in recess for that purpose. Great job, you guys.